So, the origin of today's presentation is a question. Is the construction contract, should the construction contract be changed? In fact, today's contract is very similar to the one we had 50 or more years ago. Nothing fundamentally changed. However, we note the development of technologies that can totally upset or disrupt some traditional structures, among them the BIM. It's one of these technologies that can be disrupted, that has this potential of being disrupted. So we will address 3 points with you today. It's really 3 ideas. We will talk about the BIM and the BIM as a future for collaboration on construction projects. We will talk about some issues around BIM that might delay its potential deployment or execution. We will talk about blockchain and also of the idea of a blockchain as potential foundation for BIM. So the idea that one of the impediments for adopting BIM is precisely the traceability of data, the reliability of data associated to BIM, and how the blockchain could help us solving this problem. And finally, we will talk about the construction contract. But in fact, we will talk about the construction contract, the smart construction contract. And since we are talking about the future here, the idea is to show how BIM has the potential of revolutioning not the way we write up the construction contract, but it introduces a big change, a radical change in the construction contract itself. The objective here is not to give you a law course, but to educate you concerning some ideas. And also, we would like to start a dialogue with you and industry to try and see how these ideas could be implemented. So my colleague Alexia will start with a presentation on a few elements and issues around BIM.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. I don't want to come back on what BIM is because, in fact, it would be like adding things like mathematicians. But so I will talk about the way we started our research. What was the philosophy behind BIM, in fact? Simply, very soon with Lampros, we realized that when we talk about the construction contract, when we talk about the future of construction, we precisely talk about collaboration, about the collaborative philosophy. And in fact, very soon, what we realized for BIM in our research, and while discussing with people familiar with BIM, we realized that BIM included 3 modeling level, which meant that 3 collaboration models were possible. So industry is level 1. Level 1 of BIM is collaboration that is not very advanced because we exchange data, so there's a certain transparency and a kind of freedom in the way data will be exchanged. Level 2, we realize that their collaboration is increased, so we will have a unified model of BIM. So each and every one will manage their own model, but the parties will have to collaborate so that their models hold water. So it's to come up with a unified model. Number 3, level 3, future of BIM, we will have a increased collaboration because we will have a model that might be modified by all the parties of construction. What's interesting when we look at this collaboration, which becomes increasingly important, is that BIM, in fact, blurs the limit. It blurs the established codes of construction in the sense that initially, this is what we see in the contract and at the practical level. In fact, we have a silo of 2%. We will have subcontractors and a contractor in a silo, and we'll have at the end we'll have architecture and the team, the design team. from a legal point of view. So if we go out of these established codes, we will have a certain distrust of the various parties, the stakeholders, and the lawyers working on that, and we will have problems that come up with BIMs. We have three types of problems that can be found consistently. It will be the problem of intellectual property. For example, if I have my model or an element of the model and that I convey it to the other parties, will they be able to modify it? If yes, how? Do I remain owner of my initial model? What will happen? This is really the problem of intellectual property and copyright. Secondly, the responsibility of stakeholders. For example, am I responsible for the element I bring to the BIM? If I'm not responsible of the final model, or if it's only an element I bring to the model, can I have a total responsibility linked to design? This is another problem. We also have a duty of monitoring. If I have access to the model of everyone, of all the parties, for example, as an electrician, do I have the duty to show a very simple error in a BIM model? Is it my duty? Should I do it? Indeed, these problems were noticed in our practice, but also when people come to us, come to our firm, this is what people mention for BIM problems. Now, given the development of BIM and the reality of the increased collaboration in BIM, we had to develop some contractual tools. However, we see that these contractual tools are there, they exist. It will be interesting. It will be interesting to use them, but with Lampros, we thought that we were really at the beginning of this reflection because we're dealing with the assumptions of what we're dealing with in BIM. If we look at the contractual tools, there they are. The first one, and you'll tell me that it seems obvious, is the creation of adapted contractual clauses. Yes, indeed, but increasingly, when lawyers are used to this, the more we will find good contractual clauses that we will find with our partners, and we will have to discuss with our partners. And we, as lawyers, oftentimes we say that the legal environment evolves. It's while working on these clauses, we will get closer to reality, and we will try to find a model that will be convenient for everyone. And we also have an ABC model that goes back to 2014, and that was created at IBC. It's the BIM Institute in Canada that is there to foster the use of BIM in Canada. They came up with a tool that is really interesting in the sense that you take a schedule to the design contract and a schedule that talks only and mainly of BIM. So it will govern the modeling through BIM. So this interesting model is a precursor because it also proposes answers to the problems we saw. If we take intellectual property, for example, in the IBC model, we see that all element concluded in a model remains the final and total ownership of this element. However, there will be a license that can be issued, non-exclusive license. Everyone will be able to use it, and I could reuse this eventually on other models offered by the other parties, including the design team. Now, on responsibility, we will see that there is no responsibility related to design. If myself, I'm not considered as a designer in the contract. For duty to monitor, this is interesting. We have the duty to raise inconsistencies, omission, and errors that can be found in the models of another party. It's possible. This interesting model with Lampros, it happens that we exchange to negotiate these adapted contractual clause. What's interesting is that we will try to identify there the practical issues of BIM. These issues exist regardless you're dealing with contractual clauses in BIM. So let's talk about these issues, BIM issues. If we come back, we see that BIM is more and more adopted by industry, and increasingly it's imposed by the clients. We see, for example, that in the United Kingdom, number 2 has been compulsory since 2016 for some public procurement, public market. For Quebec, we have the Société québécoise des infrastructures that plans a gradual adoption of BIM. So BIM is there, it's present, and it will become more and more popular. Following our presentation And the following of our presentation with Labros is based on this. First of all, the use of BIM will speed up. It's inevitable. It's the first thing. Secondly, we will certainly go to a digitization of the site life, or we will have an increased digitization of documents that are linked to the site. And anyway, the paper will become obsolete. So these are two assumptions we have in our presentation. And if our presumptions or assumptions were to become real, the issues related to BIM will become persistent. These issues are, well, first of all, we have the traceability of data, who did what in the model. And namely, number 3, we will have a model that the parties will be able to modify online. How can I trace what a party did, and how can I disentangle the changes that were introduced in the model or in some elements of the model? Secondly, for traceability, are the information on the model, are they reliable? Can they be a useful source or a necessary source on which I can base my work and continue them? Another issue is through traceability and reliability and the increased collaboration between the various parties, we will have to find an approach concerning the responsibility of the stakeholders. And this approach would lead us to go away from this binary approach that we have. So it will depend on the contract. BIM, in fact, to have the stakeholders use it, it needs technological and contractual logic. We will start with the technological tool that's interesting and that could help BIM to develop is the blockchain. Lampros will talk to you about the blockchain right now. So indeed, as Alexia said, what we notice is that to ensure the full deployment of BIM, we will need a technological tool that will be as secure as stamped paper. And if we give some confidence as to what happens in the virtual world for a project. So this is why we'll have this presentation on the blockchain. Maybe you heard the term before. Maybe some of you are much more expert on the topic, but it's a term that to date is usually assisted to the Bitcoin.
Expliquer un peu son fonctionnement.
For the cryptocurrency. So now I would like to tell you how it could be used in a BIM context. Now, for the purposes of the blockchain, what's important
de retenir
to take away, it's a certain informatic protocol. It's another way to code information and to gather digital information. I will explain to you the protocol in general terms, but it is really a simplification of its functioning. What we can imagine is a database, a digital database. It's an information database, and we have to keep in mind all the computers that can access this database. So today, a database does not only exist on computer. There are multiple hundreds of computers that can access the same database. So we have to keep in mind these two elements. Now, each information element is represented in this informatic protocol as a block. Each block, beside the data, beside the information itself, is dated, so there's a timestamp, and it contains the information on the identity of the database user, the user who contributed to the data or the block. Moreover, and this is where it becomes more interesting, each and every one of these information blocks, as soon as it's created or added to our database, is then reproduced or retransmitted in all the computers or within all the computers that also have access to the same database. So there's a block. The block is created, is redated, it's identifiable, and then it's reproduced or recopied in all the computers that can access the same database. These computers, each and every one of these computers that can access this database, will then verify the reliability of the data. And when they validate that the data is reliable, if I may, they will accept the block and accept that the block be added on a blockchain, which sequentially links each of this information. We have this idea of a blockchain, chain of blocks or blockchain. On this graph, you see the representation of this. Each information, if you look at the block at the last point, let's imagine that the information it contains, it's a letter like A, or it's a price on a project of an element of a BIM component. Each time it's changed or modified, it remains in the block. And the new version of this information is then added to the block. So it's extremely traceable as informatic protocol, and it meets the traceability of digital information because each and every one of the block, as mentioned, contain not only the change that was introduced, but also who made the change and when this change was made. And we can then trace all this information at all time later on. It also meets the problem of digital information because it's almost impossible, and in fact, it's a technology that was never
C'est quasiment impossible de changer un bloc.
hacked. It's very easy to change a block in the blockchain without changing all the other blocks and without alerting all the other computers that can access the database that's on the blockchain. So you have to think that this technology allows a total reliability of digital information. So we come back on this logic of stamped paper that's put in a coffer, safety box that cannot change. So we have a very strong cryptography here, and the more the technology exists and will be developed, and there will be, with time, new applications associated to technology, and that will diversify the situations when this technology might be used. What we are presenting here shows that we could perceive the blockchain as a basis for BIM or a foundation for the database for a BIM software or of all the information around the BIM model. What this could allow, if we use blockchain as the basis for BIM, it would be to register all the information and all the documentation surrounding a project in a very reliable database. We could ensure the reliability, the security of all the data linked to a project. And obviously, this will allow us to solve the problem of traceability. What Alex said is that one of the problems in using BIM is to know exactly who introduced what change and when, and then to come back in the past and to see when these changes were made. And this is very reliable. And blockchain allows this reliability in traceability. What we consider is that if we were to use the blockchain as a basis for the BIM database, we can think that the confidence in the BIM software will increase, and there will be a multiplier effect that will allow more and more users of BIM in construction projects. So its use will become more and more popular. To come back in the past, when we think about using BIM, we're not thinking only of a 4D or 3D BIM use for a construction project, but we envisage the fact that we could register all the information of a project that has traditionally been put on paper or written up in many sources. For example, the unit price, I said it previously, for each element of a construction project could be registered in the BIM model, in the BIM software, but we can also could consider introducing in BIM software all the elements of a project. For example, the completion of the parts of a building, for example. So all this digitization of the processes of a construction project will lead to opportunities for innovation for contractual structures, like the process of a implementation of a process become digitized. The contractual clauses can be digitized. This is why we will talk about the idea of a smart contract, and Alexia will introduce the topic for you. Indeed, with the advent of BIM and this technology of blockchain that can be used as a basis, with Laprosse, we thought that we could rethink the construction contract to come up with an intelligent construction contract. Before this, we will explain to you what a smart contract is, to know what are the basis notions of this. The smart contract is the idea of the fact that this type of contract had been developed in the 90s by an informatician, a computer specialist. So, in fact, everything was integrated in the contract. A simple example: if we take the case of a rented car, in fact, the contract is directly related to the car. But if for a reason or another, the location fees would not be paid, we have a relocation of the digital elements to the car. So a daily reality will have an impact on legal, on the legal aspect, and there won't be any subpoena or notice necessary, at least preliminary, before revoking the digital access. So increasingly, with this idea of a contract integrated with an object, we had the idea of having a digitized contract. This idea developed, and we came up with a smart contract. What are smart contracts? It's an informatic protocol, indeed, which means that all the modalities of an agreement that can be found today on a paper and that we develop on a paper can be developed in a source code that will be in a computer. So all the clauses and the modalities or the terms of the agreement will be executed automatically. And once again, no need of any intermediary, and a priori, no need of a lawyer. So it will we will have an automation of the contractual processes. So basically what a smart contract does is it digitizes some terms of a contract for which nowadays we need an intermediary. We're under the impression, in fact, that here the smart contract in fact, solves an important trend, which is the digitization of interactions. We say it with the BIM and blockchain. We're in a society that's more and more digitized. The contract, for centuries, has always been on paper, will necessarily, or at least will have to evolve with the world and the society around it, because the contract nowadays, it's static. It's on paper. It doesn't budge, regardless of what happens in reality. And if need be, if there's a change, we will have to introduce amendments with all the parties signing on paper, and all this will be archived. So the static contract finally needs to become dynamic. Each fact that is introduced in the reality of a project or in the reality in general will have to have an instantaneous legal reality. So initially, we will say that the smart contract was set aside because we did not have the necessary technology to secure the information on which that the smart contract could take. So it's through this blockchain, it's through the blockchain technology that we see that the smart contract can get its source of information on information that have been verified and that became reliable with the blockchain. So with the blockchain and with the technology or the theory of the smart contract that can be indeed a source code and the BIM, we naturally ask ourselves the questions of what will the construction contract will become with this technology, and Lampros will talk about it now.
Donc, toutes ces idées nous
So all these ideas, as Alexia mentioned, led us to rethink, or at least ask us the questions, why should we not rethink the construction contract? There are many reasons for this. You see them on the screen. To illustrate this, we have technology. Technology changes, and the construction contract will have to adapt to these new technologies. Increasingly, and we talked about it today, people want to collaborate on construction projects. And we need that we should have new mechanisms to encourage and support these new behaviors and to encourage collaboration or more collaboration for these construction projects. And we can say that we now have an opportunity that we did not have in the past. The opportunity with BIM, with the BIM software, with all the information output and all the what is related to construction project. So we can think about a construction project that is based partially on the BIM software or a BIM itself, and that reacts in real time to the information that is added to the BIM software. So the idea of a smart construction contract, what is it? In fact, it's a construction contract that exists partially or even solely in a computer program. The programmed clauses of the contract will be able to access directly to the BIM software or any other software that consolidates information or processes linked to a construction project. And these automated contractual clauses will react depending on the output and the input of these softwares. The idea here is not to completely eliminate the construction contract on paper. We think it would be an illusion to think that we can completely code or program a construction contract. How, for example, can we code the concept of a force majeure clause? It's not obvious how we can do that, but some other processes and contractual mechanisms could, in our opinion, easily code and program this, and when they will be coded and programmed, these clauses will be executed automatically in real time, depending on what will happen with the BIM software. So we wanted to present this idea to show you how it can work. So we decided to address a question that concerns all the construction industry, which is rapid payment. And we wanted to show you how a smart clause or a smart contract or a smart payment clause could solve this concern. What you see on the screen is a visual representation, obviously, of a clause that could be programmed in a computer code. And there's also, at the basis of all this, the fact that this clause accesses directly and reacts to the information that have been programmed in the BIM software for a given construction project. So we can imagine a situation where we have a supplier on a construction project that supplies some elements and that will make a login on the BIM software and will confirm in the software that his part or his piece is ready and can be sent. And he confirms that the part can be sent to the site of the project. What the smart clause could do, potentially, it would be to access immediately to the project account, the account that was put in place by the design team, and it's the account that deals with the whole of the project. And it could be then verified that the funds are available to pay the supplier when the element will be shipped. All this would be automatically confirmed to the supplier. Then we have the shipment of the element in question. And finally, after the shipment, once again, we access to the BIM software and we confirm that the part or the element was delivered to the site of the project. And as soon as this information has been introduced in the BIM software, automatically the funds will be transferred from the project account to the supplier. It's really a good example that shows the potential of twinning the opportunities created by the BIM software with the legal realities and the construction contract.
C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui, en fait, pour
It's true that today, for the time being, what we see is that we have no technological limit that would not allow us to automate these clauses. So if we really see that what we lack today, or at least we are the impression that we lack the trust of the various parties to have this automated payment clause. The goal of our presentation is not really to give you a law course. It's to verify the information and to see with daily BIM users or the blockchain users what can be done with the tool, and the goal is to see how can the three technologies presented today can be used in combination. We have important questions concerning this idea. There are legal questions. Will the courts recognize the executory, piece of these coded information? For example, will the lawyers have to learn how to code? I think that yes, but it's not for tomorrow. There are questions also that are more practical. How will the construction contract how will it have to change to correspond to this reality? For example, maybe some clients will not allow the use of this or the automation in all circumstances. We can foresee that a clause could stop automatically the payment, the automatic payment clause if there are practical problems. So practical problems can be raised. We're there to introduce the idea and hopefully have a conversation with you on this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Est-ce que nous avons des...
Any questions? Good morning. My question concerns the registration of the information. Once it's been registered and validated around the block, I feel that there is a shared responsibility of the various parties depending on the party using the block. Then, in the context of construction, what happens is that once the shared responsibility is taken on for an information block, then we're dealing here with mortgage contract. It's a legal duty. And here, there's a problem of shared responsibility. And finally, the clauses are usually in construction where everybody, in fact, try to make the other party responsible. So are you considering to see how the responsibility could be shared or distributed? So are you working on this?
Excellente question, puis on n'a pas peut-être toutes les réponses, mais
We don't have all the answers to this, but in fact, what's interesting with the blockchain is that each block that is created, well, the idea here is that there is no shared responsibility because we will know exactly what company, what individual within the company created this particular information block. Yes, there might be shared responsibility for all the series of information or the total information that is planned for in a computer. But concerning the change to reduce the height of a post on a project, who's responsible for the information? Well, the idea is that it will be easily identifiable who brought in this change. So we will be able to trace the responsibility with this problem, with this method. It creates the potential of having more disputes among the parties, because people will be able to point fingers and to show exactly who made the error exactly. So for this, there are other contractual tools that might be used. A complement to this, because sometimes there are elements of building performance that have to be taken into account. For example, if the client at the end says, I don't have the right building, it doesn't have the performance I expected. So who's responsible for this in the end? Yes, you're right. It's an excellent question. And I think that we will need contractual tools that will be much more adapted to the BIM reality than what we have right now. For the time being, we have the IBC model, but it's not completely adapted to what happens in reality, in the real world. We also have some contractual structures that are more on paper, alliance contracts, for example, according to which each party, instead of sharing responsibilities or identify responsibilities, they work as a joint structure. So they will focus not on structure but on benefits. This is being developed where we have almost a shared responsibility, but in fact, we have not talked about it, but it's interesting in the concept of responsibility as such. This might evolve beyond the smart contract. Thank you very much. Maybe a last brief question. For the blockchain, obviously, we need a shared network, a network that will be shared by everyone working on the contract. Is the idea here to have a kind of a global network that will state everybody accepts that, or it would be otherwise? It's a good question. I did not raise it, but in fact, we have two types of blockchain database. We have a private and a public blockchain. So Bitcoin is the example of a public blockchain. It exists on the internet, and all the computers that theoretically can access a protocol or a Bitcoin distribution system do exactly what I just said. They verify the consistency and the data themselves. But we can create a private blockchain that could be more adapted to a construction project, whereby all the parties cooperating and using a BIM model or a BIM software should create this blockchain to make sure that the data are reliable, traceable, and verifiable. Good morning. My colleague didn't want to ask the question. Well, congratulations. It's the first time I see a law firm that seriously reflects on this particular topic. So congratulations for your creativity. However, the BIM, if we look at the evolution of the construction industry, I would encourage you to look at what is done with the big manufacturers of the world, Toyota, Bombardier, people dealing with major projects to use this software. Everything you said is done everywhere. In fact, it's governed by tools that are used now. The BIM doesn't use the BLM. You could look at the BLM system. So look at this, because the blockchain adds another new element, a new technological element that might slow down what you're trying to do. So I think that you should look seriously at what the BRM is doing, because what you mentioned is confronted to this. When we talk about BIM, it's a methodology, a concept, a way of doing things. But from the contractual point of view, there are various arrangements. We talked of the BBP. We do BBP with BIM. So from a contractual point of view, what can be done with this? With BIM, it can be done, but I think that your approach, well, I think it should be a little larger. The goal is to reflect on these different points, and we conduct some research on the aerospace model. We were cognizant of this problem, and we wondered why this work method was not necessarily adapted for construction projects. And precisely as far
dans lesquels je pratique.
PPP, yes, there is this concept of collaboration. There is the use of BIM for PPPs, but initially, PPP wanted to give the private sector the whole possibility to create something, and we saw that slowly this was removed, and it became increasingly a traditional project, if I may. So I think that we need new tools to come back towards this concept of collaboration between the industry, between the clients and the builders. I think that we have to discuss about all these points. Thank you very much. I think we have to stop here.